Jacob Wilson woke up one morning to find his private road had been claimed by the HOA, without his consent, without legal authority, without a shred of shame. They slapped up signs, installed surveillance cameras, and sent him a letter demanding he pay them to use his own land. Karen Brooks, the HOA president, was smug, untouchable, convinced that Jacob was just another homeowner who would cave under pressure. She laughed when he protested, dismissing him with a condescending, "Just follow the rules and everything will be fine." But Karen had made a fatal mistake. She assumed Jacob didn't know his rights. What happened next shook the entire community. By the time Jacob was finished, Karen's empire had collapsed, the HOA was in shambles, and the truth behind their corruption was exposed for everyone to see. But let's start from the beginning. Jacob Wilson had built a life he could be proud of. A decade ago, he purchased a peaceful stretch of land away from the noise and restrictions of suburban developments. He built his home with his own hands, choosing every brick, every board, making sure it was truly his. And leading up to that home was his road. One he had paved himself, paid for out of his own pocket. A private road, legally documented, unquestionably his. Mornings like this reminded him why he'd chosen to live out here. The air was crisp, the scent of pine lingering from the trees that lined the road. The sun stretched golden fingers across his property as he sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee. Peace. Freedom. His land, untouched by anyone else's rules. Until that letter arrived. A thick envelope, stamped with the HOA's official emblem, lay on his kitchen counter. He opened it without a second thought, expecting some generic neighborhood notice. But as his eyes scanned the words, a slow, creeping anger started to build in his chest. The letter was short, blunt, and, to put it plainly, outrageous. Dear Mr. Wilson, as of this notice, your private road has been reclassified under HOA jurisdiction for community use. As such, it must adhere to HOA regulations, including maintenance requirements, approved vehicle access, and aesthetic guidelines. You are also required to contribute to community upkeep fees moving forward. Jacob's grip on the paper tightened. This had to be a mistake. He wasn't part of any HOA. His property wasn't within their boundaries. He had bought this land specifically to avoid bureaucratic nonsense like this. Still, mistakes happened. Maybe this was some clerical error. Maybe they had mixed up his address with someone else's. Jacob decided to call and clear things up. The HOA's number rang twice before a woman answered. Her voice was chipper but carried that distinct artificial politeness that immediately put Jacob on edge. Homeowners Association, this is Karen Brooks. How can I assist you? Jacob exhaled, steadying himself. Hi, Karen. This is Jacob Wilson. I just got a letter from the HOA claiming that my private road is now under your jurisdiction. I think there's been a mistake. My land is not part of the HOA. There was a slight pause, then a short, amused chuckle. Oh, Jacob. The way she said his name felt patronizing. There's no mistake. The community has expanded, and the board determined that your road is now essential for access. It's for the good of the neighborhood. His stomach twisted. Determined? By whom? Karen, my property is private. I have the deed. I have the paperwork. Yes, I'm sure you do, she interrupted with a light laugh. But really, does it matter? Just follow the rules and everything will be fine. Jacob's pulse pounded in his ears. Follow the rules? Their rules? On my land? She spoke as if this was already decided, as if he had no say in the matter, as if he was just supposed to accept that they could take what was his. A deep, slow anger burned through him. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power move. and if they thought he was going to roll over and let them take his land without a fight, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Jacob thought refusing the HOA's outrageous demand would be the end of it. He had made himself clear. His private road was not up for negotiation, but the HOA had other plans. The next morning, Jacob stepped outside with his usual cup of coffee, ready to enjoy the peaceful start of his day. The moment he looked down the road, however, his stomach twisted. Bright, bold signs had been placed along his road overnight. Private property, HOA access only. His jaw clenched. HOA access? On my land? He marched toward the nearest sign, yanking it out of the ground. The metal stakes scraped against the dirt, but the sign was firm. It hadn't been casually placed. Whoever had installed it had meant for it to stay. Then, his eyes caught something else. Something even worse. Mounted high on the trees lining the road, several brand-new surveillance cameras stood, their lenses pointed directly at his driveway. HOA had installed cameras on his private property without so much as a word to him. Jacob's pulse pounded in his ears. This wasn't just a clerical error anymore. This was a deliberate power play. Later that afternoon, as if on cue, another letter arrived in his mailbox. This one was more aggressive. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that Jacob was now required to register with the HOA and comply with their policies. It demanded he begin paying monthly maintenance fees for his own road. Even worse, it claimed his neighbors, who occasionally used the road to access their properties, now owed the HOA usage fees. That evening, Mark, his next-door neighbor, stormed onto Jacob's porch, shaking his own copy of the letter. "This is insane," Mark fumed. "They can't just decide your property belongs to them." Jacob exhaled sharply. No, they couldn't. But they were sure as hell trying. But the HOA wasn't done yet. A few days later, after running errands in town, Jacob turned onto his road, only to slam on the brakes. His stomach dropped. Concrete barriers. Thick, heavy blocks had been placed right in the middle of his driveway, physically preventing him from reaching his own house. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war. Jacob's hands tightened into fists. If the HOA thought they could bully him into submission, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They wanted a fight? They just got one. Jacob was done playing nice. If the HOA wanted to push him, they were about to find out exactly how stubborn he could be. They had trespassed on his land, harassed him, and even blocked his own driveway. Now, it was time to hit back. Early the next morning, a construction crew arrived, trucks rumbling down his private road. The workers unloaded heavy steel beams, and by noon, a massive steel gate stood at the entrance to his property. 10 feet tall, reinforced and locked tight. No unauthorized access, no more HOA interference. Jacob stood back, arms crossed, watching as the final bolts were secured. A small, satisfied grin crossed his face. Now let's see them try to pull their little power move. And they didn't make him wait long. By midday, a commotion erupted near the entrance. He could hear the furious voices before he even saw them. Karen Brooks had arrived, backed by a handful of HOA board members. Karen's face was red with fury, her manicured nails gripping the metal bars of the gate as she rattled them like a caged animal. "This is illegal!" she shrieked. "You cannot block access to a community road!" Jacob strolled up slowly, letting her words hang in the air before answering, voice steady and smug. "Community road?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "That's funny, Karen, because last time I checked, this land belongs to me." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a copy of his property deed. With a dramatic flick of his wrist, he held it up, letting Karen and her entire little posse get a good look. "You see, Karen, I actually own this road. It's legally mine, which means I get to decide who drives on it, and guess what? It's not you." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The HOA board members behind her shifted uncomfortably, realizing that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated him. But Karen wasn't one to back down. Not yet. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and furiously dialed. Jacob already knew what she was doing, calling the police. Oh, this was going to be fun. A few minutes later, 2 officers pulled up to the scene, stepping out of their patrol car with calm, assessing gazes. Karen stormed toward them, practically spitting venom as she pointed at Jacob. "This man is obstructing a community road. He put up an unauthorized gate, and I demand you make him take it down." The officers exchanged glances before turning to Jacob. He didn't even flinch. "Actually, officer," Jacob said smoothly, handing them his deed and property records, "this land is private. I have full ownership. HOA has 0 jurisdiction here." The officers scanned the documents, nodding as they read through the legal paperwork. After a moment, one of them looked up and turned to Karen. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone neutral but firm, "this property is privately owned. The HOA has no legal authority over it." Karen's face drained of color. What?" she stammered. But we decided—" "Doesn't matter what you decided," the officer cut her off. "This is not HOA property. He has every legal right to block access." Jacob smirked, crossing his arms again. Checkmate. Karen stood there, fists clenched, jaw trembling with rage. She had lost. Badly. But Jacob wasn't done. While she was busy seething, he pulled out his phone and made a call of his own, to the city authorities. "Yes, I'd like to report an HOA attempting to illegally seize private property. I have documented proof of trespassing, unauthorized surveillance installations, and property damage." He locked eyes with Karen as he spoke. Her reign of terror was about to crumble. This wasn't just about winning the battle. He was going to win the war. The city wasted no time launching an investigation. With Jacob's airtight case, property records, legal documents, surveillance footage from HOA's own illegal cameras, they had all they needed to dig deep. And what they uncovered? It was far worse than anyone had imagined. Karen Brooks hadn't just lied about the road's ownership. She had forged documents, attempting to reclassify Jacob's private road as part of the HOA's jurisdiction. But that was only the beginning. City officials discovered that she had misused HOA funds to install unauthorized cameras, erect those infuriating HOA access-only signs, and even pay for the concrete barriers that had blocked Jacob's driveway. None of it had been voted on. None of it was legal. When news of the investigation spread, the HOA board scrambled to contain the outrage. But it was too late. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. It was standing room only in the community center, packed with furious homeowners who had put up with Karen's nonsense for years. The tension in the air was suffocating. Karen, looking paler than ever, stood at the front, nervously gripping the podium. But before she could speak, someone slammed a thick folder onto the table in front of her. Financial records. The entire room fell into stunned silence as the truth unfolded. Karen had been stealing from the HOA. Thousands of dollars in community fees had been siphoned for personal expenses. Lavish vacations, luxury spa days, expensive home renovations. She had spent their money on herself. The room erupted. "You stole from us? No wonder our dues kept going up. You lied to all of us." Karen tried to defend herself, stumbling over excuses. But no one was listening. The board turned against her. Homeowners who once trusted her were now demanding her resignation and the return of every stolen cent. With multiple lawsuits looming and a city audit underway, she had no choice. Under the weight of her corruption being fully exposed, Karen Brooks resigned in disgrace. Meanwhile, Jacob stood by as the aftermath unfolded. HOA workers were forced to remove every illegal sign and surveillance camera. The concrete barriers were destroyed, restoring his unquestionable ownership of the road. And as the sun set, Jacob took one last walk to his steel gate, locked it for the night, and placed a brand new sign right in the center. Private property. HOA not welcome. He stepped back, hands on his hips, and let out a slow, satisfied breath. The battle was over, and he had won.